Hi, this is Skip from Skip's Messy Workbench. In this video, I'm going to finish the modification of the 1934 Ford pickup radiator and a lot more. I made this modification because I really hate the radiator that came with this kit. The radiator in a 1934 Ford with a V8 flathead looks nothing like the one that came in the kit. So stay tuned, more to come. In the last video, I made the upper and lower tanks for the radiator. In this video, I'll be adding the two cold side output ports and the two hot side input ports. Later in the video, I'll be fitting the new radiator to the chassis and painting and detailing the new radiator. First, I marked the locations for the input and output ports. Then, using some evergreen rod, I cut several short pieces to serve as the ports. The first one I cut joined a lot of other small parts in the Bermuda Triangle under my bench. That's when I laid down some tape and did the roll cutting on the tape. I made one extra piece because I always lose one. I then test fitted them and got them ready for gluing. I had found a clear piece of plexiglass and had been using it as a glue palette. I put a small dot of glue on the palette and then placed one end of the small ports in the glue and positioned them in the location on the radiator. This radiator is finally ready for primer and some paint. The actual flathead V8 has cooling hose connections between the valve covers and the belt idler pulleys. I need to reproduce these fittings. Also note the spark plug wires, because later in this video I'll be adding the conduit for the plug wires and the wiring. To make the engine cooling ports, I simply measured the gap between the valve cover and the idler pulley and cut some evergreen rod to fit, making sure the ends were flat, and I glued them in place. Because the parts on the engine were painted, I used some Loctite to glue these parts in place. Regular cement would not have held on the paint, and the parts were pretty delicate to be scraping paint from. I simply use a small piece of wire, dab it in the glue, apply some glue, and then place the parts and hold them together. Now that they're glued in, I just use some smaller diameter evergreen rod to be the hose post or the hose ports, and using some model glue, I glued them to the pieces between the valve cover and the pulley. Here is the engine with the cooling ports installed. Later in the video, they will be painted green to match the valve covers and the pulleys. The next thing I did was install spark plug wire and the wiring conduits that I scratch built using evergreen tubing, and I started placing wires onto the spark plugs. The 34 spark plug wires did not use wire caps. The wires had either lugs on the ends or were bare and simply wrapped around the spark plug post and then held in place with a screw down clamp of the plug. After both sides of the engine were wired to the plugs, I started routing the wires into the conduits and gluing them in place. There are some areas where there is a buildup of glue, but I'll take care of that later and during the dirtying up of the engine. While the glue was drying, I started assembling the frame. Adding the differential, rear leaf springs were installed, the standard front leaf springs, the steering linkage, the radius rods and drag link were installed and all glued in place. While the glue on the frame was drying, I started prepping the wheels. I'll be using the solid steel wheels because that's what I remember being on my grandfather's pickup. When using the solid steel wheels, the back rim used by the spoked wheels needs to be modified by cutting the spokes out. This picture shows one of the wheel backs with the spokes cut out. I checked the fit of the floor panel and the seat. The floor pan was already adjusted to properly fit the cab. To make the new radiator fit, I had to notch out the cross member on the chassis. No big deal, the notch made the radiator fit like a glove. Since there was some rust on the frame and fenders of my grandfather's truck, I applied a coat of Tamiya brown to the frame and chassis, the truck bed, and the wheels. While the first coat of rust was drying, I made the bottom cooling hose connections, again using some evergreen rod. The next couple of photos show the upper and lower cooling ports installed and painted the same green as the valve covers. I also mounted the fan. I now applied a coat of Mission Model rust color to the frame, chassis, and truck bed. While the second coat of rust dries, I painted the radiator flat black and added some brass wear on the tanks and dirtied up the cooling fins. The next two photos are the completed engine before dirtying. I used a bronze Sharpie to top the plugs in an attempt to show the spark plug caps. So that's about it for this video. The next video, I'll be getting some paint on the rest of the body parts and attempting to show wear and fading. I hope you join me in the next video. To be alerted to new content, please click the subscribe button and the bell to receive updates. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.